The origin of Black identity in America is a deeply complex and often misunderstood topic, spanning centuries of history, migration, and cultural exchange. Have you ever wondered where your roots truly lie, especially if you identify as Black? Were your ancestors indigenous to America, part of the original native Black American tribes, or did they come from Africa through the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade? Today, the lines between these identities blur for many Black Americans, leaving them confused about their true heritage. This confusion, perpetuated by a system that has thrived on obscuring these origins, has left many unsure whether to look toward the rich traditions of Native Americans or to their ancestral lands in Africa for answers. If you ask your parents or grandparents, you might receive different stories. Some will tell you that your lineage stretches back to the original native Black Americans. Others will confidently say that your ancestors came from Africa, brought to these shores against their will. But which version of history holds the truth? Which one defines the real Black Americans? In this exploration, we will uncover the history that shaped both groups, leading us to the heart of what it means to be Black in America today. To understand who the true Black Americans are, we must first grasp the different histories that have shaped the Black identity in America. These histories are complex, filled with contradictions, overlapping cultures, and shared struggles. The first group we must understand is the Black Native Americans. Who are they? Today, many individuals who identify as Black Native Americans can trace their ancestry back to both African and Native American roots. Their heritage is often connected to tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole, among others. However, their history is distinct in that many Black Native Americans lived as free people long before the institutionalization of slavery in the United States. Unlike African Americans who were enslaved, Black Native Americans carved out a unique existence as warriors, landowners, and protectors of their tribal sovereignty. Their dual heritage allowed them to forge a rich cultural identity that blended African and Native American traditions, creating something truly unique in the American landscape. One of the most fascinating examples of this blending of cultures is seen in the history of the Seminole tribe. During the era of slavery in the U.S., the Seminole provided refuge for runaway slaves. These individuals, who came to be known as Black Seminoles, were not just taken in by the tribe, they became part of it. They intermarried with the Seminole people, fought alongside them in battles, and played a critical role in the tribe's survival and governance. This was not a relationship based on dominance or subjugation but rather one of mutual respect and cooperation. The bond between Black Seminoles and Native Americans was so strong that it challenged the very notion of what it meant to be enslaved in America. These were free individuals who lived on their own terms, contributing to the preservation of their tribal lands and culture. But the story does not end there. Some historians argue that the native Black Americans themselves may have origins that trace back to Africa, aligning with the out-of-Africa theory. This theory suggests that all humans originated from Africa and later migrated to other parts of the world. If this theory holds true, then even the original native Black Americans would have African roots, complicating the narrative even further. However, for the purpose of understanding American history, it is essential to consider the distinct differences between Black Native Americans and African Americans, two groups that, despite their shared struggles, have different cultural histories and origins. This brings us to the second group, African Americans. Unlike Black Native Americans, African Americans are descendants of Africans who were forcibly brought to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. The journey of African Americans is one steeped in pain, resistance, and survival. From the brutal conditions of slavery to the systemic oppression that followed, African Americans have fought to reclaim their identity and heritage in a country that sought to erase both. Slavery stripped millions of Africans of their cultural identities, languages, and traditions. Families were torn apart, and the connection to their homeland was severed. Yet, through centuries of resistance and adaptation, African Americans forged a new identity, blending their African roots with their experiences in America. The term, African American, was adopted as a way for Black communities to acknowledge both their heritage and their citizenship in the U.S. It reflects a deep pride in their African roots while also recognizing the painful history of slavery and the ongoing struggle for civil rights in America. But this identity is not static. Since the 1960s, the landscape of Black identity in America has shifted dramatically. Immigration has introduced new groups of black people from the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe, many of whom do not identify with the term African American. These first and second generation immigrants often maintain strong connections to their home countries, whether Jamaican, Nigerian, or Haitian, while also navigating the broader black experience in America. This diversity within the black community adds layers of complexity to what it means to be black in America today. Take, for instance, Darian Labiche, a Jamaican-born black man who was raised in the U.S. His identity is fluid, shaped by both his Jamaican heritage and his experience growing up in America. For Darian, his blackness is the constant thread that ties together the different aspects of his identity. For many like him, the term black feels more inclusive and representative of the global diversity within the black diaspora. It transcends borders and acknowledges the shared history of African descent, regardless of where that journey began. However, to fully understand the distinctions between these groups, we must dive deeper into their cultural identities. Black Native Americans, for example, have preserved many of their indigenous customs, languages, and spiritual practices, which set them apart from the African American experience. Their identity is rooted in the history of their tribes, not in the legacy of slavery. Tribal ceremonies, spiritual beliefs, and governance structures have remained intact in many Black Native American communities, passed down through generations. In tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole, Black members have taken part in and even led traditional ceremonies that honor their land, ancestors, and spiritual beings. These rituals reflect the deep connection Black Native Americans have to their indigenous heritage, which remains distinct from the African influences found in African American culture. It's important to remember that this history is not just about labels and identities, it's about survival, resilience, and the ongoing quest for self-determination. Black Native Americans and African Americans alike have fought for recognition, equality, and justice in a country that has often denied them both. Their stories are intertwined, yet each group has carved out its own path through the unique circumstances of their history. By understanding these histories, we can better appreciate the diversity and richness of the Black experience in America today. As we wrap up this exploration, it's important to support efforts to continue these conversations. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video if you want to see more content like this. Together, we can build a community that respects and celebrates the complexity of Black identity in all its forms. Let's keep learning, sharing, and growing together. Have you ever wondered about the origins of Black identity in America, particularly whether your ancestors were native to these lands or brought here by the transatlantic slave trade? The history of Black Americans is anything but straightforward, and it has left many today questioning their true roots. Were your ancestors part of the original native Black American tribes, or did they endure the brutal journey from Africa as slaves? This ambiguity has persisted for generations, largely because government records and historical accounts have done little to clear up the confusion. Some Black Americans may believe that their lineage traces back to Native American tribes, while others are certain that Africa is their ancestral home. But which version of history is correct? Which story is truly representative of the real Black Americans? To find the answer, we must dive into the history that shaped both Native Black Americans and African Americans, uncovering the intricate cultural blend that defines Black identity in America today. The story begins with Black Native Americans, individuals who trace their lineage to both African and Native American ancestry. These communities, often connected to tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole, have a rich and unique history. Long before slavery was institutionalized in the U.S., Black Native Americans lived as free individuals, playing critical roles in their communities. They were warriors, landowners, and protectors of their tribal sovereignty, blending African and Native American traditions to create distinct identities that reflected both cultures. One of the most notable examples of this cultural fusion is the Seminole tribe, which offered sanctuary to runaway slaves during the era of slavery. These individuals, known as Black Seminoles, became an integral part of the tribe, marrying into it, contributing to its governance, and living as free people. The relationship between Black Seminoles and Native Americans was one of mutual respect and cooperation, standing in stark contrast to the enslavement experienced by African Americans. But the history of Black Native Americans is not without its own complexities. Some historians argue that even the original native Black Americans may have roots in Africa, pointing to the out-of-Africa theory, which suggests that all humans originated from Africa. This theory complicates the narrative of indigenous identity, as it implies that Black Native Americans, too, might have African origins. However, for the sake of understanding American history, it's crucial to acknowledge the differences between Black Native Americans and African Americans, particularly in their cultural experiences and histories. Now, let's look at African Americans, whose history is deeply tied to the transatlantic slave trade. Unlike Black Native Americans, African Americans are descendants of those who were forcibly brought to the Americas, stripped of their cultural identities, and subjected to the horrors of slavery. This brutal history shaped African American identity, which is rooted in a legacy of survival, resistance, and resilience. Slavery severed African Americans from their cultural and familial ties to Africa, leaving them to rebuild a sense of identity from the fragments of their heritage. Over time, African Americans developed a unique culture that blends African traditions with their experiences in America, giving birth to iconic elements such as jazz, soul food, and African-inspired spiritual practices. The struggle for civil rights, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, became a defining feature of African American identity, as did the ongoing fight for equality through movements like Black Lives Matter. Despite the differences in their histories, Black Native Americans and African Americans share a common experience of systemic racism and exclusion. Black Native Americans, because of their African ancestry, were often marginalized within their own tribes, facing discrimination both from their tribes and from the broader white society. Laws and social norms stripped Black Native Americans of their tribal identity, excluding them from land ownership and participation in tribal governance. Similarly, African Americans faced the brutal oppression of slavery and segregation, enduring systemic racism even after emancipation. Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation, limiting African Americans' access to education, housing, and voting rights, further entrenching their second-class status in American society. The blending of these two identities became more pronounced during the Great Migration, a period from the early 1900s to the 1970s when millions of African Americans left the rural South for urban areas in the North and West. This movement, driven by the desire for better economic opportunities and an escape from Jim Crow laws, led to a mixing of African American and Black Native American communities, particularly in cities where these groups often lived side by side. During this time, many African Americans began claiming indigenous ancestry through family stories or oral traditions, though proving these connections was often difficult due to the loss of records during slavery and the forced removal of native tribes. Despite these challenges, the cultural blending of African and Native American traditions became more evident, particularly in music, storytelling, and spiritual practices. As the quest for understanding one's ancestry grew, the rise of DNA testing offered new insights into Black American identity. Companies like Ancestry and 23andMe allowed individuals to trace their genetic heritage, revealing Native American markers in the DNA of many African Americans. This discovery sparked a renewed interest in reconnecting with Native roots, exploring tribal affiliations, and reclaiming lost aspects of identity. However, DNA testing also has its limitations. Due to the random division of chromosomes during reproduction, a person may have a native Black American ancestor but not inherit the specific Native American genes. This randomness in genetic inheritance, combined with the limited genetic records available for native Black Americans, means that even if someone has Native American ancestry, it may not always show up in their DNA results. So, what does it mean to be a real Black American? The truth is, Black identity in America is multifaceted, shaped by a rich blend of African, indigenous, and other cultural influences. For some, being a real Black American means embracing their African heritage and the struggles of the African American experience. For others, it may involve reconnecting with Native American roots and the traditions of their tribal ancestors. Ultimately, the term real Black American does not invalidate one experience in favor of the other. Instead, it highlights the depth and complexity of Black American identity, recognizing that both African and Native heritage are valid and significant parts of the story. Black American identity is an ongoing journey of self-discovery, one that honors the resilience of African Americans while also celebrating the cultural legacy of Black Native Americans. This diversity is what makes the Black American experience so unique, offering a rich tapestry of histories, traditions, and experiences that continue to shape the nation today. What do you think about your own ancestry? Do you believe your ancestors were native Black Americans, or were they brought to America through the transatlantic slave trade? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know if you'd like to see more content exploring Black history and identity. Don't forget to subscribe to the Black History Archives and click the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos.